When people talk about AI training data, the most common response I hear is, well, you agreed to the terms. And that sounds reasonable until you actually look at what those terms usually said. Most platforms ask us to agree to language like, we may use your content to improve our services, or you grant us a license to process and analyze what you uploaded. That kind of language existed long before modern AI. It was written for things like spam detection, content moderation, and basic product improvement, not training systems that can generate text, images, and code at a massive scale. So the real question isn't whether we clicked I agree, it's whether that agreement was meaningful. For those of you who are new here, I'm Kristen, I'm a software engineer, and I think it's important to not just talk about what we build in tech, but what our systems end up doing to people. If this topic interests you, I would appreciate it if you like this video and subscribe. It helps get this message out to those who need it. Ethically, consent has a few basic requirements. It has to be informed, specific, and understandable. And this is where the AI training issue breaks down. Most people didn't know their post could be used to train general-purpose AI models, that those models could be sold or licensed, that the outputs could compete with their own work, or that this use would be permanent and impossible to reverse. None of that was clearly explained to everyday users. Checking a box to use a social platform is not the same thing as consenting to build an entire AI economy. And timing matters here. Much of the data used to train current AI systems was created years, even decades ago, long before people could reasonably imagine how it would be used. Even if platforms update their terms today, that doesn't retroactively create informed consent for content people shared 10 or 15 years ago. There's another issue that matters just as much: power. Consent only works when both sides have real choices. Individuals had no ability to negotiate terms, no practical way to opt out, no share in the upside. Companies had the ability to aggregate data at a massive scale, the resources to monetize it, and full control over how it would be used. That's not a fair market exchange. It's value extraction under conditions where saying no wasn't realistic. For many people, opting out of major platforms meant opting out of modern work, communication, and social life. That's not free choice, that's coercive by design. When one side captures nearly all the value and the other side has no meaningful leverage, consent becomes a formality rather than a real agreement. This is where people often say, but it was legal. And that may be true, but legality and ethics aren't the same thing. A lot of practices throughout history were legal before society had the language or the framework to challenge them. For example, child labor was once completely legal. Children worked long hours in factories, mines, and mills. It wasn't considered exploitation, it was considered normal, even necessary. It took decades of social pressure, documentation, and changing norms before laws caught up to what people already knew felt wrong. The fact that it was legal didn't make it ethical. Laws often lag behind technology. What we're seeing now is that gap. Companies wrote contracts broad enough to allow future use no one could possibly understand at the time. This might satisfy legal standards, but ethical consent requires more than that. So here's the question that actually matters. What happens when companies profit from assets they didn't meaningfully pay for? In other domains, land, labor, intellectual property, we already have frameworks for this. Data slipped through the cracks because it felt abstract, but once you see it clearly, it's hard to unsee.